Well, this is too cool to see everybody here. What a great day to have all of you here and your faces and your minds and everything else. It is fabulous to have this group of students, warfighters, operators, to be able to advance what you're doing for your services and for the nation. Captain Goodmanson, thank you, and welcome to all of you, and to everyone both here in the auditorium and those also out in virtual land. It's really important to have this kind of a hybrid experience, and from this point forward, we will continue to do that. Because we've had, in the past year, many different experiences with COVID, but one of the good experiences has been the expansion of the conversation that goes on every day here as we have had speakers, and they've listened to us from the East Coast to around the globe. So we're happy to have both those who are here and those who are here also virtually on this terrific learning opportunity. Now today, on the subject of advancing our defense technological leadership. The pace of change is increasingly driven by rapid advancements in technologies, which has an impact on all of us and how we live our daily lives, and to the balance of the economic and military power on the global stage. We know that, we see it. How do we understand it? Technology alone is not just a capability. Our military requires advanced education to develop technically competent leaders who understand and can discern and can employ technology effectively in the all-domain battle space, under, on, and above the oceans, as well as shore, in space, and in cyberspace. Science and technology research ensures the technological advantage of our military and of our nation. Education drives intellectual dominance and cognitive agility. Together, they create technological leadership. Here at NPS, we do both. Technological leadership is our mission. Today, our guest speaker will look to the future of defense and of defense science and the technology that is all about that with us today. We're very pleased, and I am honored to have with us today a national leader who has been at the forefront of defense issues facing our country. He has been a member of Congress from the great state of Washington, just to the north of us, of course, since 1996, and has been the chairman of the House Armed Services, Committee since 2019. In fact, Congressman Adam Smith has been on the HASC since he started in Congress. He was formally chaired in the past the Subcommittee on Air and Land Forces, which had jurisdiction over all the Army and nearly all the Air Force acquisition programs. Prior to this, Congressman Smith chaired the Terrorism and Unconventional Forces, Threats, and Capabilities Subcommittee, which oversaw the United States Special Operations Forces and counterterrorism policy, among other critical areas. He also has previously served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And given his current and previous committee assignments and extensive travel, Congressman Smith has unique insights into today's foremost national security issues around the globe. I must also say, prior to his getting on stage, every congressman, when he or she is in DC, has no time. Their discretionary time is nearly zero. And so when they get out on the road, they're able to see things, but to be able to get out on the road as the chairman of the HASC is phenomenal. So we're very honored And I ask that all of you please join me in giving a warm NPS welcome to this leader and welcome Chairman of the HASC, Congressman Adam Smith.
Thank you, Vice Admiral. Thank you for your leadership and for that very kind introduction. It's great to be here. It's great to be here at an in-person event with actual people and not staring at a video screen. So I appreciate that. And I'm incredibly impressed by what you do here. It's my second visit. The leadership that comes out of this school is enormously important to our country, to the Department of Defense. We appreciate that leadership. I do want to say we got to get you a Space Force flag, by the way. I've seen those. They're really cool. They kind of dominate the other flags at this point, but we'll have to add that at some point. Well, as the Vice Admiral mentioned, the talk tonight is about, or this afternoon, is about innovation. And what can we do to really increase innovation within the Department of Defense to meet our national security needs? Now, as everyone in this room, literally everyone in this room, knows better than I, the history of warfare is driven in large part by new technologies, new capabilities, and as importantly, who figures out how to use that new capability best first. You got to innovate and you got to apply. And that's what we really have to work at getting better here in the country. Way back when, somebody figured out how to use horses in battle first. And that person who figured that out had a tremendous advantage for a while. We have got to be able to innovate and then use that innovation to meet our national security objectives. And I'm not going to give you the doom and gloom speech. I've joked that, since I got on the Armed Services Committee 25 years ago, and I did not have a military background. Fort Lewis Army Base and McChord Air Force Base, now Joint Base Lewis McChord, was in the middle of my district, and that's how I got on the committee. So when I showed up to the Armed Services Committee trying to figure out what's going on, I felt, well, the basic job here is somebody from the Pentagon or somebody from a think tank comes over and basically scares the hell out of us. They tell us about some threat that's out there that A, no matter what you think it is, it's 100 times worse, and B, we're absolutely never prepared for it. That seems to be what drives it. So I'm not going to tell you that we're so far behind that we're in dire straits. I love this country. I think we are still the best, most capable country in the world. When you look at our universities, when you look at our capital markets, we have incredible strengths that we can use to meet the challenges that we face. We just have to understand what those challenges that we face are and how to get better at it, and specifically how to get better at the innovation and capabilities game. And a couple of people asked me, why did I come out here? It's part of a larger effort on the House Armed Services Committee to better understand how to do that and to get out and meet with industry leaders. Because the number one challenge, and I'll go through 4 or 5 here, is to get back to having that strong connection between innovative U.S. companies and the Department of Defense. And I'm not going to say that they don't have a connection, but it's not like it used to be. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was a very strong link between those two, and now that began to fray. And in large part, that began to fray because of a practical reality. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the Department of Defense, much of the time, was the biggest consumer of a given new technology. It was the logical place for innovators to go. But as commercial markets have caught up, and as the pace of technology has sped up, as the Vice Admiral alluded to, increasingly that's the commercial markets, and that's where they go. And the ability to do business with the DoD has become more difficult and more complicated and has broken that connection. Now, a bunch of steps have been taken in the last 5 or 6 years to begin to heal that. The DIU, AFWorks, a couple things that I visited up in Palo Alto yesterday, have come out here specifically to connect with the innovators and try to rebuild that bridge between the most innovative companies in this country and the Department of Defense, but we have to build on that. And we have to make sure that we tie that link back together. And as we're working on that, there's a number of challenges, but the 3 that I want to focus on is the sort of resistance to that change. This is something that's been brewing within the Department of Defense for a while. Ash Carter, when he was Secretary of Defense, and even before that, was a real leader on this, who recognized the need to build those connections with innovative companies. And in the Secretaries of Defense that have come since then, they've also been focused on this. We've been doing this, whether it's the blank slate review, the night court that the Army went through, a real effort to look at what we're doing within the military and try to figure out how to make it better. But the challenges that exist in our system have made that process slower than it needs to be. And I will focus on three and then talk about a fourth thing that I think we do reasonably well but need to build on. First of all is within the Pentagon itself. The incentives are somewhat misplaced. There is not an incentive to innovate. There is more an incentive to follow process and follow requirements. The culture within the military for a long time was about following a very strict set of rules and a strict set of process. It lacked the sort of creative approach to problem solving, which is why I love what you do here, because that's what you do. You're presented with problems and you figure out how to solve them. Process and requirements don't dominate what you do. Creativity pushes you towards solutions. We have to change that culture within the military to get to that place. And then, of course, there is the procurement cycle, which, to make it very simple, it's too long. As technology is changing rapidly, if you're saying that basically from the time you have an idea, at a minimum, you're looking at 2 years before you can buy it, well, by the time that timeline is done, what you're working on is obsolete. And certainly if you look at, and I find the F-35 program enormously frustrating. I express that frustration in a variety of different ways, with all due apologies to Lockheed and others. It's not necessarily their fault. It's the process that was put in place. And it's not just the F-35. The tanker program has had similar struggles. We don't really know how to buy software and technology in the rapid way necessary to get us to where we need to be. We've got to speed up that cycle. For one thing, we've got to give the Pentagon greater flexibility in terms of moving money around so that they're not locked into a 2-year or 5-year cycle. So it's like, you've got the money, this is the way you've got to spend it for 5 years. No matter what innovation comes along, you're locked into that. We've got to open up that flexibility to enable them to make more rapid decisions. Now, again, as I mentioned, there's good news here. We're learning from that. I've been briefed on the GBSD program, on the B-21 program, on the NGAD program, and the way they are purchasing technology for those programs, the way they are making sure, number one, they don't turn the IP back over exclusively to the vendor, so you get into vendor lock. Those programs are doing better right now. They're on time, under budget, and meeting their performance goals in ways that programs started in the late 90s and early 2000s really didn't. But we've got to get better at that and fix the culture at the Pentagon. The other problem and challenge, of course, is the defense contractors. And they are very innovative, but they are also focused on making money, unsurprisingly. So if they get a contract, they do not have a problem with vendor lock. Let me just put it that way. Vendor lock is an enormous advantage for them because it means they're going to keep getting paid for an extended period of time. And I got a lot of different stories I could tell about that, but the simplest way to think about it, for all those of you out here who might someday become procurement officers, competition. Anything we can do to keep competition in the system is going to help, because that is what is going to motivate contractors. Now, I know there's typically a lot of talk about legacy systems versus new systems, big contractors versus innovative companies. I don't think those distinctions are really the key point here. Sometimes a legacy system turns out to be something that works really well right here and now. You don't get any more legacy than the B-52, and it is a critical part of what we're doing right now. It's a matter of how you use those systems. And large companies are also capable of innovating. Lockheed, Boeing, those companies are absolutely capable of innovating. But they innovate when they are threatened. And please understand that. They will tell you different. They will assure you that it's their constant desire to change and innovate and compete. It's not. It is their constant desire to make money and reward their shareholders. And that's okay. I'm Adam Smith. I'm in favor of capitalism. That's incentive, okay? That's what pushes people forward. But our job in government is to force them to compete, because they don't want to compete. They want to win. And that's okay, but we have to build our system so that we force that competition. And there's a whole wide variety of ways to do that so that we don't get into that vendor lock situation, so that we encourage innovation. And another key part there is the advantage that the large companies have is that they've got enough employees to fight their way through the Pentagon bureaucracy on a contract, where a small company might look at that and go, I'm not playing. Some of the best innovative technologies out there get lost because of how cumbersome and time-consuming the DoD bureaucracy is. We've got to tear that down. So number one, the smaller companies, then they'll play. They'll be more interested in getting involved, and the larger companies will see that, and they'll have to compete. They will have to get better to get those contracts instead of just getting them because they were always there and because they were big. That change within the defense contractor community is crucial. But again, they're not going to make the change. We policymakers, people at the Pentagon, we have got to constantly put the pressure on them to force them to change and force them to innovate. Last big impediment to this is where I work, the United States Congress. And we have some incentive problems of our own. The biggest incentive being that if it's in our district, we have to keep funding it no matter what. And we have to come up with whatever creative argument we can as to why it has to continue to be funded in our district. And I understand political realities. I got elected to the state senate when I was 25 years old. I've been running campaigns pretty much my entire life, and I know how that works. But we can't let that get in the way of spending dollars efficiently and effectively at the Pentagon. And I will tell you also, and I realize this is the wrong audience for this, but for those of you politicians listening, constituents understand that a heck of a lot better than you think they do. When I was first elected, my first term in Congress, one of my first big votes was whether or not to build more B-2 bombers. A good chunk of it was built in my district, or as my MLA at the time used to joke, that the wing was built in my district, and the thing is pretty much all wing, so you can gather how much is built in my district. But I didn't think it was a good expenditure of $2 billion a year, $2 billion a plane to keep buying them. I voted against building more B-2 bombers. It took a long time for Norm Dix and the Northrop Company to forgive me for that. But my constituents, they listened to my reasoning, and they knew that it was what was in the best interest of the district, and they were perfectly fine with it. Probably not all of them, but enough of them that I kept getting reelected. We have to be more innovative in Congress as well, and not be locked into the idea that if it's our program, we have to keep funding it. And the reason for that is because we have a big challenge right now. We cannot afford to waste money. We live in an unbelievably competitive world. I do not share quite as high a level of paranoia about China as some, but there is no question that they are a competitor, that they want our influence to go down and their influence to go up. Russia feels the same way. Transnational terrorist groups are a constant and evolving threat. We have got to be really smart about how we make sure that we are able to defend this country and deter our adversaries. We cannot afford big, wasteful programs anymore. The last 20 years have seen a ton of programs. I mentioned the F-35 that's over budget, the tanker is over budget, the expeditionary fighting vehicle that got canceled, future combat systems, a long list of systems that wound up way crazy over budget, or got canceled or did not meet their needs. We've got to learn from those lessons in terms of how Congress conducts itself, how DoD conducts itself, how contractors conduct themselves, and get better about how we do it so that we can get more for the dollars that we are spending, we can meet the rapid pace of technological change, and we can deter our adversaries and protect this country, as is all of our jobs. I believe that we can do this. As I said, this isn't a doom and gloom speech. I love this country. I believe in what we do here. But we've got to be really honest about where we're weak and where we're strong, learn those lessons, and move forward. And the last thing is about all of you. One of the greatest strengths that we have is our people, is our personnel. When we're talking about how do you find the right technologies, how do you know how to innovate, and then most crucially, how do you, as I've mentioned, apply that to what you're trying to accomplish? There's all kinds of neat whiz-bang technologies that don't actually help us get anywhere. How do you apply it to the problem? It's all about people. It's all about having experienced, knowledgeable, creative people who can come up with those solutions and solve those problems. And that's the way we need to start to develop the talent within the Department of Defense. That's what this institution has been doing its entire time, and is why I feel what you do here at the Navy Postgraduate School is so crucial to the overall objective. And the last thing I'll say is, to do this, we really need to empower those people. And I alluded to this earlier when I talked about the way the Pentagon works, and it's all process-oriented. Not all, but too much of it is process-oriented. We want to people-proof the system. You want to get to the end of it and say, okay, we actually didn't achieve our objectives, but we followed the process. So we're all good and we get promoted, right? What I want is for you to say, no, here's how you get to the solution. I have an analogy for this, and I apologize for this analogy. My youngest child, my son, just graduated from high school, and he played soccer his entire, from the time he was 4 to 18. And when he was 4 years old, the first year he played, he had a really good, talented coach. He coached high school, which is not normally what happens in rec league soccer. And she was teaching them all these fancy drills and everything. And they went out in the first game, and it was, the 6 kids on the field just sort of running around in circles, doing all kinds of crazy things. So after the game, I took my son up to the field, and I said, look, there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's really complicated. But at the end of the day, it's simple, too. Your job is to put this ball in that goal. How you want to do it, that's entirely up to you. Go figure it out. And he did quite successfully for 14 years. And that's what I want for all of you. I want us to stop telling you, you have to stay in this box. You have to work this process. I want us to tell you, we want this capability. We want to be able to protect our networks from cyber attack. We want to be able to figure out how to make vulnerable our opponent's information systems. We have to be able to protect our command and control systems so that they can't get shut down, thereby cutting off all of the platforms that are out there. That is what I want from our people, is to free you up to innovate that way. Because at the end of the day, warfare right now comes down to information and survivability. Basically, you have to be able to get access to the information, which we're pretty good at. But then the real tough part is, in that sea of information, what's important? How do you find what's important? And how do you find it in real time when you need it? And then how do you get it to the person who needs it most? The captain of the ship, the infantrymen on the front lines. How do you make sure in real time they get that information? How do you protect it so that it can't be disrupted at a crucial moment? And then ideally, how do you make vulnerable your adversary's information systems? And then how do you do the best job of making sure what you send out there is survivable? The biggest platform in the world with the most firepower in the world, if it can be taken out by a missile like that, it's not very useful. We're to the point now where we have the swarm of drones out there, which is a heck of a lot cheaper than some of the expensive platforms. We don't know how to find that. We don't know how to stop that, and neither do our adversaries. That's the type of creativity that we're going to need to meet the national security needs right now and into the future. And your education, what they're teaching you to do here, teaching you to solve problems and be creative, that's going to be absolutely crucial to what we're trying to do. So I thank you for that leadership. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and incredibly honored that I'm the first one in a while to do it in person in front of a group. And as I understand it, somebody is going to be coordinating questions here. Or maybe it's me. But either way, I look forward to your questions, and I thank you for the chance to speak.
Thank you, Congressman Smith. That coordinated role falls to me. I'm Scott Gartner. I'm the provost of the Naval Postgraduate School, and it's terrific to see everybody and to be here as well. So I'd like to invite, starting maybe with students, to come on down to the 2 microphones. We'll also be taking questions from those who are online. And I got my cheat sheet here to remind the students to please introduce your name, where you're from, what you do in the service, what curriculum you're studying here at NPS, and then compactly, please, your question. I've also been asked to tell you to stand close to the mic when speaking, but apparently not too close. So be careful about that. And we'll alternate between. So, ma'am, if we'd start with you, Dominic, Major.
Hello, sir. I'm Major Dominique Hittner, U.S. Army. My basic branch is field artillery, and I've assessed into the Acquisition Corps Post Command. I'm a student here in computer science, and I'm studying modeling virtual environments in simulation. And I'm getting my PhD. And I am also the president of our student council, the president's board for student affairs. And on behalf of all of the students, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to meet with us today and to speak with us. We're very grateful. So for my first question, science and technology research enables economic and military progress, yet there are disinformation efforts by some groups and by our adversaries to discredit legitimate work and important progress. How do you deal with this as a HASC chairman at your level, and what advice would you give to a DoD student studying in the field of science, technology, engineering, and math?
The first part, and this has always been a problem, whenever if we can agree on the facts, then we can move forward. Well, we've never been able to agree on the facts. Everyone tries to spin their facts for their own particular, purposes. The phrase, when the phrase was used, he presented alternative facts. That was sort of the best summation of something that had been going on for a long time. Number one, don't forget that there is, in fact, truth. Because that's easy to do. It's easy to sort of say, well, if everyone's making it up as they go along, why pay attention to what's actual reality? There is actual reality, there is actual truth, and you have to continue to do that. And then also, and I think it is relatively simple in that there's access to a lot of information, and I guess the best thing I could say is be skeptical, okay? Wherever the information comes from, be skeptical of it and double check and look in other places. I don't think it's that hard. I just think that a lot of people don't want to go through the effort, that you'd rather believe what's sort of in your own little echo chamber. So the best thing I can tell you is challenge your own personal assumptions. Seek out people who disagree with you. Seek out people who are different from you. Because then that gets you thinking in a mode of critical thinking, of not just taking whatever somebody throws in front of you and assuming it's true, even if it's a trusted source. Be skeptical, challenge those assumptions, and check a whole bunch of different sources. I know it's difficult, the internet cranks out a whole bunch of stuff, but you don't have to believe it. You don't. Check it. We have a lot of smart people out there. You can double check information and be skeptical of it, and I think from that, we'll learn a lot more.
Thank you.
Congressman, Lieutenant Dave Nygren, computer science student. I'm here as a Navy cryptologist, going to USS Eisenhower next. My question is, you're talking about in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the DoD was a big customer, and that's why a lot of companies would come. Well, DoD at that time also did a ton of innovation in-house. Really set the backbone for a lot of what we call the information age nowadays and the space age, and all of that really came from in-house DoD, NASA, other big federal government programs. How do we as the federal government, or is it even appropriate for us as the federal government to get back to that, to doing our own innovation and leading from the front, not in every area, but in some areas at least?
I think the way the economy is set up right now, it's not realistic to sort of take that approach. Now, DoD is always going to do some amount of research, they're going to do some amount of in-house development. But when you look at the sheer volume of technological change out there, it's going to come from the commercial sector. We have got to build those relationships. And the other thing that we have to do is from the very start, when we're working with developing some of these companies and some of these innovations, you got to look for dual use opportunities. You've got to look for something that's useful in DoD and useful in the commercial sector. And that's exactly what they were telling me yesterday at DIU, and what the VCs that I was meeting with and all the companies I was meeting with. That is the new model, is to look for those commercial applications. And even in space, there are just a ton of commercial applications now as everyone's launching satellites and figuring out how to do launch vehicles and build the satellites and do all of that. We can take advantage of that and get the R&D that way. And when you look at the budget, I mean, in the 50s, the defense budget was roughly 50% of federal expenditures, and it was about 15 to 16% of GDP. Today, it's about 15% of the budget and about 4% of GDP. And that's not going to change. There's a whole lot of reasons for it, which aren't worth getting into. But so that smaller amount is going to be there. But what's a lot bigger is the commercial investment. And that's where we've got to rebuild those relationships. And one final point on this, I mentioned domestic U.S., and we certainly want to encourage that. Certainly we do not want to be dependent upon China. We want to look for ways to innovate. But we also have to look at international partners. What we need is a trusted network. It doesn't have to all be made in America. We want to encourage that. But if we've got trusted partners in Europe, we've got trusted partners in different parts of the world, take advantage of that and get those investment dollars and leverage them. I think that's the way we're going to have to do it. It's not going to be the same as it was right after World War II. Because, look, post-World War II is a historical anomaly that we don't really fully appreciate. We dominated the world in a way nobody ever had before. And it wasn't necessarily because we were uniquely intelligent at that point. It's just that the entire rest of the industrialized world had just been blown off the face of the map by World War II. And we hadn't. If you're going to fight a war, A, it's good to win. B, it's good to fight it on the road. And that's what we did. Okay, but that's not something we're going to repeat, hopefully. So we have to live in the world we live in now. And that is a far more competitive, spread out world where the commercial sector is where we need to access that innovation. Doesn't mean we stop, doing DoD innovation, but to get to the scale we need, you're going to have to rely on the commercial side.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Question, and then maybe we'll go online after that.
Good afternoon, sir. Captain Lamarck Patterson, Army Civil Affairs. With the war in Afghanistan complete and the redeployment of U.S. troops, what are your thoughts on the U.S. creating a power vacuum that a competitor like China could use to extend their global influence, say like their Belt and Road Initiative?
Yeah, I think that's a real risk in Afghanistan. China's going to try to find a way to get in there. And I wish there was a better outcome in Afghanistan. But a couple things I want us to remember. Number one, the primary mission over there was to make sure that 9/11 wasn't repeated, to make sure that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda weren't able to continue to plot, plan, and launch attacks against us. And all the men and women who gave their lives and put their lives on the line in Afghanistan gave us 20 years of that not happening, okay? And let us not think for a moment that that was guaranteed or that their sacrifice wasn't worth it to accomplish that goal and the objective. Now, the second objective that we came up with while we're over there is, can we build a stable Afghan government that keeps the Taliban and Al-Qaeda out? And the answer to that question turned out to be no. We did not get there. It was not for lack of trying. It wasn't for lack of effort. Certainly, there were mistakes made in how we went about trying to do that. But there was nobility in the effort. It wasn't going to be achieved. The cost and the risk of American lives simply was not the right choice at that point. We're now going to have to deal with a world where we have a more chaotic Afghan government and where certain regional partners, certainly China and others, could potentially get more influence. But they also, let's not forget, have more responsibility too. Responsibility for making sure that they maintain some stability in that region or it will harm them as well. And that's part of what I think the U.S. struggles with is, like I said earlier, we were the dominant power for a while. We're not going to be the dominant power in the world. The power has spread out. China, Russia, Europe, India, a whole bunch of countries have risen up. We have to figure out how to work in partnership with much of the rest of the world to meet our challenges as well. And I think that was a bitter and difficult lesson that we learned in Afghanistan. But again, understand that I had people ask me for years, I don't know what we're doing in Afghanistan. I was like, are you not paying attention? 9/11 was not that long ago. I think it's pretty clear what we're trying to do there, and that is contain the transnational terrorist threat. I think the plan that President Biden has laid out going forward is the better, more cost-effective approach now to achieving that objective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is our first hybrid SGL, and so we're delighted to have the questions, and we're going to get to you in just a second, but we're going to take one first from our online community.
I was expecting a voice from above, just to start talking.
It's right here, Congressman Smith. We do have a number of folks online, and one of the questions was in response to your comments about the bureaucracy and speed of keeping up. Our DoD bureaucracy is still quite challenged by the speed of technology development and our ability to adopt to new acquisition processes that can match pace. In fact, winning great power competition may depend on how fast and agile the business of DoD becomes. How do you foresee the DoD adaptive acquisition framework being utilized to advance defense technology and defense leadership? That was from Captain Tina Hill.
Yeah. By and large, I think the reforms that we have made in the acquisition process over the course of the last few years have created the regulatory environment, with one exception, which we need to work on, I'll get to in a second, where DoD can be more rapid in its response. And by the way, I want to give a shout out to Mac Thornberry, who was my predecessor as chairman of the committee. Mac is a heck of a lot smarter guy than I am, and he understood that acquisition stuff on a level that most members of Congress rarely can achieve. And he was really the driver behind a lot of those acquisition reforms to pull back some of those regulations, to give more other transactional authority, to enable more commercial purchases. It's all in place, but there's a culture there. Even if the regulations allow you to do it, there's a long history of doing it the other way. So I think the key part is changing the culture within the Department of Defense to, as I said, incentivize those more creative solutions. Now, the one exception is we still have this problem with this, inability to move money around within a minimum of a 2-year time frame and sometimes a longer time frame. So if you've gotten money for a particular purpose and then you're like, nah, we need to move it over here, Congress restricts your ability to do that. I am advocating very strongly that we remove that restriction and free up that ability. But I think that if the Pentagon wants to, they now have the ability to get there. But the cultural change is what's going to be required. And it's a matter of the leadership. And the other part of the problem we've had is we don't yet have the Biden team in place. It's just the whole process of turning over a government takes a long time. So we don't have, we're just now getting our service secretaries in place. Ton of positions below that have not been filled. I think that's the direction that Secretary Austin and Deputy Secretary Hicks want to go in. They need to get the players in place and begin to help, further push that change forward.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. Sir.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. My name is Lieutenant Commander Lin Lin Zhen, Supply Officer studying Acquisition Management, Acquisition and Contract Management. So my question is, there is much being written about great power competition. Technologies is driving changes and strategies to address it. Given your responsibilities and perspective as a HASC chairman, how do you approach developing policies for this very complex subject, and where do you go for advice?
Well, the first thing is to understand great power competition. Okay, well, what does that mean in terms of what we're going to actually do? And I think what it means, first of all, is economic competition. And we've got to reorient not just the Department of Defense, but our entire economy to figure out how we compete with China on cutting-edge technologies. 5G is one of the best examples, but AI and we have a piece of legislation that's passed out of the Senate that we're working in the House that is focused on funding and changing a lot of policies to focus on that broad competition. I think we make an enormous mistake if we look at great power competition from the standpoint of we have to build the military strong enough so we can win the war with China. If that's the way we're approaching great power competition, I think that's a mistake. Certainly we need to deter them militarily, but the real competition comes in technology and innovation, economics, and also our political system. We believe in freedom. We believe in political and economic freedom. China believes in an authoritarian approach to both issues. And when we're going out there in the world and trying to get countries to side with us, that's a huge part of that competition. A lot of the great power competition isn't happening in Eastern Europe or the South China Sea. It's happening in Africa. It's happening in Latin America. And it's happening in the Pacific Islands, as China is all over the world, in many cases trying to suck up all the fish, contrary to the international law of the sea. That's where the competition is happening, and we have to see it that way. It's as important, the relationships that we build with countries in Africa. I was in Tunisia right before everything fell apart, and China is really aggressively trying to build a relationship there. What do we have to offer that's better than what China's offering? Well, one of the things we have to offer actually is security assistance, both in terms of the weapon systems that we can sell them and training we can provide. We're better at it than them. China and Russia, the equipment they sell tends to break down, and then they got nobody to fix it. So that's we've got to think really holistically about what this competition means. It's not just a war game. It is a way of looking at the world. And I will stand by the statement that for all the mistakes that the United States of America has made in the last 100 years, a world where we are a prime player in driving how things go is a better world than where we're not. And it's certainly a better world if we are more actively engaged than China and Russia. And I 100% believe that. Not everybody in this country does, I understand that, and we can always work to get better, but that's what the competition is about to me, and I think we got to sell that to the country. You know, we got to convince people that this whole effort on the economy and everything else is worth doing, is in our interests.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Major Mike Wish. I'm an artillery officer. I'm here in the applied physics program, and I'm headed to the Naval Academy after this. You spoke earlier about innovation both in the companies that we deal with when we're contracting and working with acquisitions, and then also within the DoD itself. But any organization or system that's seriously attempting to innovate really has to have a high tolerance for failure. And so my question is really two-part. One, in the acquisitions process, what are the political and fiscal realities with how much failure we can tolerate in programs that don't work out? And then within the DoD itself, the military culture isn't exactly, failure tolerant, right? We like to say, hey, mistakes are great, and we fail and we learn, but nobody here is trying to fail on any given day. So how do we change a little bit of the culture, just enough so that some of that innovation can actually happen in a productive manner?
Yeah, there are other iterations of my speech that I gave, by the way, that really focus on that point. We do not tolerate failure. We are terrible at tolerating failure within the Pentagon because, we sort of, again, we're trying to people-proof the system. And as long as you followed, you got your little book there, and here's the rules. As long as you followed them, the whole thing can blow up in your face, but you're good, all right? I want to get to the point where, if you, and this is a crucial point that someone made to me yesterday, because the way I usually like to talk about is, that whole thing, solve the problem. And if you go to the book, well, no, wait a second. If we did this, I know it's outside the rules, but this will get us to a better place. And we've got to reward people when they do that, because then they solve the problem. But what the person told me is what you really have to do is you also have to reward them even when they fail, okay? If they were willing to be creative and willing to take that chance, even if it didn't work out, then that shows you that they have the right approach to problems. And we have got to change that. I apologize to keep coming back to soccer analogies. It would have been better if my son had run up playing baseball. I actually did finally become a soccer fan. I'm an American guy. I like football. I like baseball. Soccer is like they're running around. They're not doing anything. What's going on out there? But soccer is the same way because, my son's a striker. His job is to score. And, a lot of times, most of the time, if you watch it, they fail. Okay, but if you're watching it, you see the creativity that goes into it. Shooters got to keep shooting. Okay, you put the person in the position, you got to enable them to succeed. So to answer your question, we do not tolerate failure the way we should, and that is one of the central lessons that we need to learn. And I think it's part when there's a bad outcome. We always want someone to blame. You always want, and a lot of times that's just life. Okay. Failure is part of life. There's not always someone to blame. There's not always some way you could go back and make the system so that you never fail. It doesn't work that way. And I'm really worried about the whole self-esteem movement and the whole thing that you can't ever feel bad. It's not the way the world works, okay? You're gonna fail, you're gonna screw up, and what we gotta teach you is how to deal with that and learn from that and encourage that type of creativity instead of jamming everybody into a box where they never have to feel like they failed. And we really need, I think, to teach that differently, academically, but then also at the Pentagon. Got to reward people for taking those chances, for being creative, because that's how you'll find those solutions. That's an outstanding point.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. Let's take another question over here, and then we'll go to online again.
Good afternoon, sir. Captain Gannon. I'm a manpower officer by trade and in the manpower system analysis program here. To build off the major's question in your previous response, what laws are we looking to change in the personnel, admin, and management of the human resources within the DoD? Because we're still working under the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, and the services would like more freedom, I believe, to manage their personnel better, but it's legislative, it's legal statutory constraints, so we can't take an innovative officer or enlisted personnel,
Yeah.
pull them out of their career progression pipeline, and then plop them in charge of something that we believe in, and then risk failing at it to learn something, to fail forward, so to speak.
Yeah, the best answer I can give you is Eric Schmidt and Bob Work did the AI task force, which was supposed to how can we become the leaders in AI. But the number one recommendation when I've met with Eric and Bob is personnel, and free up the ability to do exactly what you just said, to move personnel around and also to recruit the right type of personnel and bring them in. The vetting process is part of it. A lot of people out there would like to move from a technology job to go to work for the government. They're motivated by a variety of different things, but you got like a year-long vet, and we have got to streamline that so that we can move personnel around. And I don't know the ins and outs of this. Again, it kind of goes over my head, but we have a series of recommendations that we are putting into the NDAA, National Defense Authorizing Act, this year that come out of that AI commission. And to try to create that flexibility to attract the right type of personnel. I will also point out, by the way, this is why diversity is important. And I'm really frustrated at the way that the debate over how we create greater diversity within the military has descended into this ridiculous argument about critical race theory. Okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff over there that we can go ahead and talk about. But when it comes to attracting talent, you've got to go after all of the talent. And historically, women and people of color have not been as included in all aspects of our society, but in the military as well. We have got to aggressively go out in those communities and recruit people, because there's a ton of talent out there that we're not getting access to because of past history and in some cases present action. And that's really what we're trying to do there. Now, certainly there are extremists on the left and there are extremists on the right who are trying to do a whole bunch of other crap, and good luck to them. But we are trying to have diversity for the sake of equality, inclusion, and quality. Get the talent. Wherever you can find the talent, bring them in. And it's also part of the issue about, what are the requirements to join the services? The physical requirements, the PT and all that, that's all great. But now we need people who are computer scientists. There's a different type of person that you're looking for to fill those types of jobs. And the services, to the services' credit, I really believe they're focused on trying to make those changes to bring that personnel in, but they're getting some pushback that isn't overwhelmingly helpful. But personnel is where it's at if we're going to be able to innovate and be creative as we've been talking about.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Let's go online, please, Dave.
Hi, sir. A question from online from Captain Thomas Wicki. You said on June 16th, you spoke about the Space Force budget at a HASC hearing, where you pointed out that much of the budget is focused on legacy systems or big, juicy targets. What do you think the balance should be of funding legacy systems to maintain current capability while simultaneously funding cutting-edge technologies? And do you think the U.S. leaves itself vulnerable if we solely focus on developing those smaller, more agile, or capable systems?
Yeah, I'm only laughing because I think what happens at our hearings is my staff writes my statement, and I read it to make sure that it's not like something really crazy is going to get me in trouble. And then I say okay, and then my actual statement I just do off the cuff. I don't read what's in there, but that's what gets submitted for the record. So I'm not going to stand by absolutely everything that's written in there because the odds are pretty good that I didn't read every word of it. With that caveat, I don't like to talk about legacy systems. I like to talk about capabilities. And when it comes to the Space Force is just getting started. Space Force has some controversy, I understand that. But I think it's the right thing to do because it really places an appropriate amount of emphasis on what is the centerpiece of all of our systems, which is launching, operating, and protecting our satellites. I don't know the specific answer to that question in terms of legacy versus innovation, but there was a lot of innovation going on, and many of you know this better than I do. The focus on smaller satellites, on partnering on the commercial side, that's where the innovation is going to happen, so that we don't have a couple. We've relied for a long time on very large, exquisite satellites. We need to spread that out. That's part of the survivability issue. I don't know why I keep looking at you. You just read the question. You didn't ask it, so it's not like you were a question. I should look at the whole audience. But, so those small satellite, that's where the innovation is going to happen. And I believe they are headed in that direction, okay? It's early days, and we're trying to figure out how to make that work, but that's where the innovation needs to happen. I don't know what the exact right mix is, but I would, just sort of emphasize that point. Don't think about legacy systems, think about capabilities. What are we trying to accomplish? Well, in space, what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to make sure what I said about information. It gets to everybody who needs it when they need it, real time, right up front, and you can protect it. That's what we're trying to do in space. So those are the systems that we need to build, the command and control system that we need to build to get there. And I'm cautiously optimistic that the Space Force will help us make that step, will move us in the right direction. Because love the Air Force, but the Air Force is about air superiority, nuclear weapons, and then space, okay? We had to get space up top and get that better emphasis. Doesn't mean we can't still screw it up, but I think it gives us a better chance of placing the proper emphasis on space and having that balance. I just think it works.
Thank you. And I think as provost, it's required for me to point out that NPS is the graduate school that has educated more astronauts for NASA than any other graduate school on the face of the planet. That was in the contract that I say that, so.
And we thank you.
I also wanted to build a little time between what you said and our Air Force student who's going to speak and take a little pressure off of him. So, sir?
Thank you, sir.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, sir. My name is Captain Tim Bettis. I'm an Air Force officer, obviously, foreign area officer candidate here at NPS, and then after my training pipeline, I'll be heading to Saudi Arabia. And I appreciate the opportunity to hear you speak, especially as one of the key members of civilian oversight over the military, which is the question I can't not ask about while you're here. Specifically, there's been a lot of, I'm sure you're aware, either dialogue, interviews, or editorials about the state of civilian control over the military, both military participation, let's say in the January 6th events, or in the politicization of military advice from Congress, coming top down. I would love to hear your perspective on the state of military or civilian oversight over the military. Obviously, this is a room full of civilian senior officers or senior NCOs, fundamentally all leaders required to carry out what we know to be our mission. Do you see any trends that are concerning to you? Do you see any trends that are positive in the realm of civilian control? Thank you.
Yeah. See, I have a really good answer to give to that question, but I'm trying to figure out how much of it I should actually say publicly. Let me say this. I have an enormous amount of confidence in the Department of Defense and in their commitment to the Constitution. And the reason I say that, and I could get into some really fun stories, but I won't, is near the end of the Trump administration, there were a couple of issues. Let's just put it that way. But at the top of mind for me was those issues would only become really problematic if DOD went the wrong way. I can't tell you the number of people, Democratic members of Congress and friends of mine, over the course of those last 6 months, who were deathly afraid, and I'm sorry, I don't necessarily get into this argument, but that the former president was going to use the military to exercise a coup and take over the country. They were really worried about that. And I did not take for granted that their worries were misplaced. So I was in regular contact with senior leadership at the Pentagon, and I never had a reason to doubt that the military didn't understand its commitment to the Constitution and its commitment to civilian control of this country. So within the military itself, I have no doubt, no concerns, whatever speculation has been out there, because I was talking to them throughout the whole process, and their commitment was bedrock to that principle. Sorry, that's stories about that. But anyway, the point is the military stayed on the absolute right side of that. I am a little concerned operationally. As you know, we've had a couple of secretaries of defense now who were senior officers, and we had to change the law in order to allow them to take that post. I could not possibly have more respect for both Jim Mattis and Secretary Austin, but there's a different perspective that civilians bring to problem solving. And a lot of what we're talking about here, I think, benefits from strong civilian leadership. So I worry about that aspect of it, that civilians sometimes, their voices are not heard on key policy decisions. Because, I mean, look at me, I'm the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. I grew up in SeaTac. I went to High School. I never served in the military, you know, and then General Austin or Jim Mattis is going to come in, and I'm going to say, yeah, no, you can't do that. Okay. It's a little intimidating. So you need to make sure that we have, you know, enough civilians there in the Pentagon, and that they're calling the shots and they're leading it. And that I worry about a little bit. You know, Mattis was a very, very strong leader at the Pentagon. And, you know, and I worry that hurt a little bit the typical civilian rise. And again, now we've got this transitional problem where a lot of the civilians haven't been appointed yet. So you had a real gap there. And certainly when Esper was fired and they made Miller the Secretary of Defense, there was a period there where the civilian leadership was not outstanding. So, you know, we got to get those civilians back up. That's the only worry I have. But in terms of, you know, the military protecting the Constitution and understanding that they're not running this place, I have no doubts about that. Complete confidence in them.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Good afternoon, sir. Captain Nicholas Royer. I'm a Comstrat officer by trade, but I'm going through for the modeling and simulation program. And when you're talking about obstacles to innovation, and rightly, in my opinion, pointing out that the innovation is going to come from the private sector, I kind of can't help but think of the human element of that, where went to school for computer science. A lot of my peers in undergrad are now working for Google, Microsoft. We've seen like engineers at Microsoft walking out of a project for use of their I think the IVAS program the Army's using. Yeah. Google engineers walking out of, you know, programs to develop AI in coordination with DoD. I look at my colleagues from undergrad, and they don't necessarily have the same lifestyle that I have. They don't have the same values I have. We probably vote differently, think differently, you know, are married differently or not, as the case may be, different lifestyles. And you mentioned since the 1950s, you know, obviously different world. Our higher education system is dramatically different, and that still continues to feed both the private sectors, engineers, and military leadership. And I can't help but think it's producing two very different types of people now. How do we cope with some of these challenges in a world where the private sector may simply not want to work with the DoD, or there's that cultural divide that doesn't seem to be getting any narrower any day?
Yeah, the good news, the Microsoft and the Google stuff is very isolated, okay? And particularly Microsoft. I work very closely with them. I've worked closely in the IVAS program. They're 100% in, and they don't have a problem with it. Are there some employees at Microsoft, some employees at Google who are troubled by that and walk away? Sure. But it's a very small number. And it is not. And I was worried about this and went out and talked to a lot of tech companies. That is not an impediment to tech companies working with DoD. It's a few isolated people who are not driving the policy at the place. The bigger impediments are what we talked about earlier. It's just the cumbersome doing business there. But your broader point is valid. I do worry about the 1% of our population and the ones who serve. We don't have a draft anymore. It is a different value system that gets developed. So anything we can do to sort of bring that back together, I think is going to be helpful. There are active efforts and very successful efforts. I met with some venture capitalists yesterday, and I think 80% of the people in the room are former military, and they work with groups to actively recruit people into the military who have those tech backgrounds, and then people in the military go into tech, and there is a very strong, lack of a better way to put it, patriotism about them that is there, that you don't see every day. Don't pay attention to social media. Social media is dominated by a certain segment of society, well, extremes for the most part. I think there's a whole lot of people in the middle who are a lot more closely connected than that would imply. All of that said, my daughter, who I've not yet mentioned, is a senior at the University of Washington. She said she's probably the only person to go off to college and become more conservative. It can be a challenging environment, and I do think that there is some effort out there that doesn't recognize what the Department of Defense does, okay, and the importance of what they do and the importance of defending this country. And that's why in my earlier remarks you heard me say more than once that I believe in what this country does for all of the things that we may have done wrong. I think we need to work on that. We need to make sure that people, yes, work to make the country better, but also understand the necessity of defending it. And I think there's a lot of effort that needs to be taken out there to drive home that message. You can be critical of what we're doing, that's fine. But let's understand how important the people who serve in the military, how important the Department of Defense is, and strive for the right balance. We've got to look for ways to bring people together, which sort of gets back to the first question about how do you know what's true out there, and how I mentioned be skeptical. We need to get people out of their boxes and start interacting with people who are different from them. And yes, I think we have some work to do in terms of college education out there to make sure that people have proper respect for what the military does, and that there is a more open and connected and understanding of what that means. I think there is a challenge there. But for now, I don't see that undermining the tech world's willingness to work with the Department of Defense.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Great. Unfortunately, we have only time for one more question, so we'll take your question. I want to thank both of you for waiting, as well as students who were online and community members who are online. Apologize that we could not include all the questions. They've just been terrific. So please.
Thanks, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Lieutenant Bailey, I'm weather officer here to study weather. To focus on your political career.
Hey, I just went to, I can't remember what it's called, but I was at the Weather Center with Jim Hansen, who runs it, and they do incredibly important work. And ironically, also, Jim Hansen went to the exact same high school that I went to, which was shocking to me. Not a lot of people came out of Tahiti, so go ahead.
To focus on your political career, you've been in office since I've been a gleam in my father's eye. So from then to now...
Thanks for that, by the way. Yeah.
So, from then to now, how would you say the political atmosphere amongst your constituents has been with looking towards innovation, given the current incentives of programs going on within their districts? And if you had the chance, the unrestricted chance right now, to write legislation that would promote innovation, what would you put out?
Wow, the second question is going to be difficult. I think, how to answer this question? Yeah, I've been working in politics for literally 40 years. When I was in high school, I started working on campaigns. As I mentioned, I got elected to the state senate when I was 25, so I've been at it for a long time. I think the biggest thing that has changed during the course of that time is the level of participation and the rapid pace of change. More and more people are politically engaged than they used to be. And at the same time, the world around them is changing in a way that is threatening. You don't get secure anymore. It's just there's so much change in jobs and technology and life that people need something to feel a little bit of security. And I think what that has caused is just unrest. Well, I guess I would use this analogy. I read The Lexus and the Olive Tree, a book that was also written, I believe, before you were born. But it was an analysis of globalization by Thomas Friedman, and he had this analogy in there. And so this was like 95, 96 that he wrote it. And he was anticipating the changes that were coming, and he said that the modern world, he had the analogy of the lion and the gazelle. Okay, every day when the lion gets up, he knows if he's not faster than the gazelle, he goes hungry. And every day the gazelle knows that if he's not faster than the lion, then he's dead. And I was on a panel one time with Thomas Friedman way back then, and I raised the point, I said, I don't think people are going to be excited about that type of life. You don't want to get out of bed every morning going, oh my God, what's happening? Coming for it. And I think as a policy leader, my job is to bring some stability to that. Is to let people know that, it's going to be okay. There's a rapid pace of change, but we're going to build a safety net. So I think that's the biggest thing that has changed, is the pressure that innovation has put on people has made them more hostile to it. And we really have to focus on that. And I don't want to get into sort of health care and child care and all of that. But the basic elements of a stable life. My father was a ramp serviceman at United Airlines, high school education. He just worked hard. And his job really didn't change much in the 32 years that he did it, but he made enough money to raise a family. And he didn't really have to worry about it that much. There's a hell of a comfort in that. He had other things he had to worry about, but and we need to sort of build that and recognize that and respect that, and the hostility that people have towards innovation, the hostility they have towards science, as was alluded to earlier. Sorry, I gotta say this, get vaccinated if you haven't. It's just, it works. It's the right thing to do. Anyway, that hostility comes from the disruptive nature of that, and that's what we need to work on. As far as legislation, see, I think it sort of defies legislation. Legislation is not really that much of the point. It's more the culture. It's more the way people approach things that I've talked about so much already. about being creative and being innovative. As I said, you can look at the federal rate, the FAR, I forget what FAR stands for exactly, and I have a law degree. But you're supposed to look, you want to look at all that stuff. I think we've changed it enough. The legislation's there. It's culturally how you approach issues and how you approach that. We could spend more money on a wide variety of different things, certainly, but we're already spending a lot. So I don't think it's a matter of legislation. I think it's a matter of culture, it's a matter of education, it's a matter of educating and training people to be creative problem solvers, to focus on that problem, put the ball in the goal, solve this problem. That's what I think we need to do. So I don't really have a piece of legislation. If I think of one, I'll let you know. But I think it's more a matter of how we educate and train people. Thank you all very much. Very much appreciate it.
So think about this. The chairman of the House Armed Services Committee used a number of words a number of times. Creativity, innovation, culture, opportunity. Those are kind of words that we need to think about as we embark on this journey of knowledge. He also implicitly invited us to do something else. As we wish to be understood as a military and our mission, we need to understand the role of legislatures and of legislators and of the process that makes us good civic citizens and leaders of our country. And that's what military does, because we are expected to be the leaders that understand those things. So as we go about this journey of thinking about technology, and the chairman talked about capability. As we think about what that means, that's not only about what the stuff is in our hands, but what it does and how it has impact. And sometimes that's about influence and ideas, as much as it is about ordnance on target. So we have been challenged by the chairman of the HASC to do those things. And it is great to have had him as our first speaker in this hybrid environment to keep us on that journey of knowledge and of application of knowledge so that we end up leading not only as warfighters but also as great citizens of this great country. So I want to thank the chairman for his time, for his investment in us as we invest in our nation and its security. Thank you, sir, very, very much.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.